Hello and welcome to a Team Moray Robotics event recap. On November 8th, I competed at Macro's Autumn Annihilation with my ant-weight combat robot, Moray. Moray is of course my main robot, and a few months before this I brought it back after taking a short break from running it. That redesigned version did pretty well, going 2-2 in the main tournament and 2-1 in grudge matches, so I didn't want to change too much. I loved how much reach I had with the big spinner, and I really loved the wide chassis as well. I made the chassis a little less wide this time to save on weight. I changed from the Fingertech Charge Jack switch to the Fingertech Mini Power switch after my other robots had some issues with the Charge Jack switch breaking. And I added some screws to the corners of the top plate by the uprights after I really overlooked that part at ImmerseCon. I also used these carbon fiber eel heads instead of the paper googly eye ones. Adding to the look of the robot, I did something I hadn't been able to do since the original version of Moray, which was painting the top plate, which was still TPU this time because it worked at the last event. And I painted eel with it on the back. The thing I wanted to focus on, which I felt was the biggest issue with the previous version, was the drive. Moray drove extremely poorly because it was just really slow, making it hard to follow up on hits or keep up with faster opponents, and it had pretty much no pushing power, getting pinned by an upside-down robot with only 2 wheels touching the ground. This made it clear that I needed a lot more traction than what the Fingertech wheels offered, and I lost a permanent marker, so I decided to use the wheels that Casey, the builder of Permanent Marker, sells. The Roach Robotics Get a Grip wheels were something that I had seen multiple robots have success with, so I thought they would be a great thing for me to try out. When they arrived, I could tell just by feeling the tread that they were much grippier, and driving the robot around felt a lot better than before. I could really notice the difference, especially when I was turning. It helped that I also switched to the Radio Master Zorro transmitter, which offered me a lot more options for customization, and it felt much easier to control the robot with how it sits in my hands. The only other change was that I brought all my stuff in a much more efficient travel container, which I put some stickers on the morning of the event. This was Moray's second time at Macro, and the first time I went home with a strange third place finish and my only trophy so far in combat robotics. At this point, I think this was the most confident I had ever felt in a version of Moray. Macro only allows 8 full combat ants, which was another factor that made me feel good about my chances of leaving with a podium finish. All 8 robots showed up, so it was a fair, even bracket. This event was a little bit smaller than the usual Macro events, but that kind of made it more fun in a way, where there were still a lot of serious competitors, but it was kind of a smaller group of people to talk to. This is one of my favorite events I've been to, and the first time I ran 3 robots myself. Also, the builder of Hellhound had to fight Doomslug, and he didn't have any top armor, so I let him look through my box of old random parts to see if there was anything he could use. He found an old Moray blade and taped it to the top of his robot, where it prevented him from taking any damage even though he ended up losing the fight anyway. If you ever need some random stuff to put on your robot, come look through my random parts bin. There's lots of stuff in there. Moray's first fight was against Lars Elliott. Enigma was his brand new large vertical spinner that he built in like a week or something. Out of all 7 robots I could have fought, this was the one that I wanted to fight the least. We both used the same just cause hub motor, and before the fight we positioned the robots in front of each other to see how likely it was that our motors would get destroyed. I did not feel great going into this one, however, Moray did have a slight reach advantage due to the uprights extending farther from the chassis. Because of this, and because I didn't want to try outdriving Lars, my strategy was to drive straight at the front of Enigma and try to hit the chassis before he could reach mine. The newer wide version of Moray had actually never taken a full-on chassis hit before, so I was worried about how it might hold up, since it seemed like it would be fairly likely I would take a good hit. When the fight starts, I decide to box rush him, which works out as my reach advantage gets Moray the first hit of the fight, throwing Enigma into the air. I stay squared up and deliver another hit that throws Enigma into the air again, where he lands on top of Moray's fork, causing him to get stuck and allowing Moray to get a perfect hit on the backside. His spinner digs into the floor and launches him into Moray, separating the 2 robots. I charge over to him right as he gets back on his wheels, but get flipped after going weapon to weapon. I lost an eel head here. After pushing Enigma, it was clear that his left side of drive was down, which should give Moray a huge advantage. Having this advantage, I desperately didn't want to do anything stupid and take a serious hit, so I tried to slow it down and line up a good hit somewhere where I wouldn't have to worry about his spinner. Moray grinds a little bit at his front armor, and then this happens. A colossal, probably weapon-on-weapon hit flips us both and sends Moray flying while Enigma's spinner hits the wall and sends it straight up to the roof of the arena. You can see that his bottom plate is already cracked, so upon hitting the floor, his battery comes out of this crack and detaches in mid-air. Macro ends the fight as a knockout if a battery becomes exposed, giving Moray the win. This is without a doubt the most excited and surprised I've ever been at a combat robot event. Not only did I finally beat one of Lars's robots, which I didn't expect to beat, but Moray was dominant and won due to a battery flying out of my opponent. I was so excited by this I jumped back from the arena when it happened. The superior reach on Moray's weapon really won at the fight here, as I could go straight at Enigma and win the exchange. The improved traction from the Roche wheels were also a massive help, because not only was Moray significantly faster and able to do a box rush, but I was able to immediately rush over to Enigma when I saw an opening, and I could be super precise and controlled when I needed to. What happened at the end was that Enigma's spinner hitting the wall cracked his bottom plate, which was made of PLA because it was a very quick, last minute build. I got to keep this cracked bottom plate and it's hanging on my wall. Who could have guessed that a cracked piece of plastic could bring me so much joy? The damage to Moray was minimal, and like I said, an eel head came off, and both uprights were slightly torn into. The reason I have the TPU uprights extend almost enough to cover the whole motor is for moments like this where they get hit instead of the $60 hub motor. After this incredible first fight, I honestly felt like I could stand a chance against pretty much anybody. Put Moray in the box with Endgame, I can definitely take it. My next fight was against Taipan, a modular robot that can be a vert, a suplexer, or a hammer saw, but for this event I think it was only running either the vert or the suplexer, and my configuration would be the same for either one. Taipan is built by Ben from King Snake, which you might know from NHRL. This is actually a rematch from the March macro event where Moray won, but Taipan only had one side of drive working and no weapon, and Moray also had a very hard time in the fight. It was kind of a disappointment, so both of us really wanted this rematch. This was the same place in the bracket that we met last time, and the winner of this fight would be guaranteed at least third place. I felt pretty good going into this because of what I did to Enigma, and I definitely had a reach advantage again. Ben also told me that his weapon setup might explode, so I wanted to go weapon on weapon. Taipan went with the vertical spinner for this fight, and my strategy was the same as the last one, just keep the front pointed at the opponent. When the fight starts, we miss each other, and then the forks cause us to get stuck together. After we separate, Moray grazes a fork and then cuts one of Taipan's drive belts as it sheds a fork. We go weapon on weapon, which flips Moray and allows Taipan to get a hit. Taipan stays on top of me and lands a huge hit that sends Moray into the air and all the way across the box. Hey, I stuck the landing. A little bit shaken from the first few exchanges, I frantically try to turn to face him, but Taipan catches Moray's wheel guard and flips it. This allows him to get a big hit on the back of Moray, which I thought for sure would have severely damaged me because it's only 2 millimeters of TPU. I sacrificed material and weight on the back to improve other parts of the robot, hoping that I just wouldn't get hit there. To my surprise, Moray still works and I retaliate with another huge hit, which was big enough to slow Moray's spinner almost to a complete stop. Moray loses a weapon-on-weapon exchange and then flips Taipan with a solid hit, but he just barely avoids a potentially devastating hit to the bottom. Then...
Oh, that's battery!
Holy crap!
So yeah, Moray wins by another battery exposure. This is easily one of the biggest and most destructive hits I've ever seen in Ants, and by far the best hit Moray's ever landed. So I'm pretty sure what happened here is that Moray's hit to the fork ripped up Taipan's fork mount, which his spinner then ingested, causing the whole front of the robot to be ripped open. You can see the battery dangling out of the robot in mid-air. Yeah, that's probably my favorite fight, not just with Moray, but with any of my robots. Taipan had me for a little while, and the fight was pretty back and forth until that amazing ending. Taipan's switch was hanging completely out of the robot, but it was still on because the battery was plugged in and the indicator light was on. The TPU walls around the screw holes on Taipan's fork mounts ripped out of the rest of the piece because you can see that the screw is still attached. Ben gave me both of Taipan's TPU fork mounts, which are on display on my robot trophy shelf. I was also given the drive belt and a pulley, which I'm assuming is for the drive system. Taipan's winner's token is a fantastic little Taipan model that's so cute, and it lives next to the other winner's token from our previous fight. Moray did take some serious damage in this one. The uprights had some material stripping off at the bottom, and the first real hit to Moray's new chassis tore into the TPU a little bit, but not enough to do any harm. The wheel guard mounting point also took a hit and got torn just a little bit. The biggest amount of damage was to the back, which, as I said, is not super well armored. That big hit tore the back out of the 2 screws, keeping it in its place, and ripped through the material in between one hole and the bottom. Who knows what would have happened if I got hit there a second time. I solder welded it back together, but it wasn't nearly as pristine as it was earlier. There was also a little bit of Taipan on the weapon tooth. After that performance, I really felt like Moray was a formidable opponent for anyone, and it was now guaranteed at least 3rd place, meaning I would be leaving with my 2nd trophy. In the winner's bracket final, Moray would have to fight Doomslug, an overhead sawbot and a personal favorite of mine. The builder of Doomslug, Kevin, also runs Lifeline, as you might know from NHRL, and he's updated Doomslug for this event to be a lot more similar to Lifeline. Moray just fought Doomslug at its last event and lost in an extremely one-sided fight. Moray lasted to a judge's decision, but I got controlled for almost the entire duration of the battle. The big issue there was that Moray was sluggish. It was way too slow to avoid getting scooped up or get good bite. Even with a much better drive system, I was still pretty worried about this fight because an overhead sawbot is much different from a compact vertical spinner like the ones that I had been fighting. A sawbot is extremely good at cutting through TPU, which is what Moray is almost exclusively made of. As usual, I was tight on weight, so the only armor I could afford was taping old TPU mounts and a PLA fork onto the top plate. This strategy did save me from getting annihilated in our previous fight, but there was a lot of luck involved in that. To make weight for this, I took off the wheel guards. When we got into the box, Doomslug only had half of its drive working and had to fight like this because Macro doesn't allow for pushes. This was great news for me because the chances of getting pinned and sawed were definitely lower. My strategy was to be cautious and try to get around to the side. When the fight starts, Doomslug's forks get caught on the floor and give Moray an opening to land a massive hit that throws Doomslug into the air. I waste no time trying to follow that hit up and frantically try to get another one in the corner. As I slowly approach Doomslug, Moray's disc bites into his TPU forks and flips him over, where I immediately see that I can hit the saw, and Moray grazes it, while also ripping up his top plate. I wanted more than anything to take out the saw so that there was no threat of damage. Moray lands another hit and runs straight at the saw but barely misses. I continue to be extremely aggressive and flip Doomslug again. I catch the back of his fork for a good hit, and then Doomslug's fork gets stuck in between Moray's wheel and wheel guard, which allows Moray to land some free hits. A massive hit to the backside launches Doomslug into the air, and I keep targeting the saw, but when the opportunity presents itself, I aim for the exposed underbelly, which shaves some sparks off. Another hit sends pieces of TPU flying, and you can see how quickly I try to go for the saw blade. While Doomslug is propped up on the wall, I have time and line up a direct hit to the saw, followed by a bunch of quick hits, including this one where I back up and then floor it to get as much bite as possible. Moray's disc gets stopped as Doomslug crawls on top of it, and then Doomslug gets some airtime when it flies up towards the camera. I accidentally hit the corner that Jeff specifically told me not to hit, and by now Doomslug was looking pretty beat up, and I keep being as aggressive as possible to make sure I don't get pinned and sawed. Moray puts a sizable gash in Doomslug's bottom plate, and my spinner comes to a stop with Doomslug on top. Ripping into his fork, Moray flips Doomslug and delivers a brutal hit to the arm before throwing him into the wall. With a lot of space in between the two robots, Moray gets a good running start and lands another big hit that knocks Doomslug onto its wheels. Only the arms seem to be moving, and I offer to hit him again, but Kevin taps out and sends Moray to the grand final for the first time. That was probably the most dominant performance Moray's ever shown. Obviously, Doomslug was not fully functional to start, but this is easily the greatest display of driving I've had so far. The new wheels allow me to flip my opponent and then immediately come in for a follow-up while they're in a compromised position. Another thing that really helped was the fact that Moray's spinner reaches very low to the ground, and without the side forks, it even rocks forward and scrapes the floor at times. This allowed me to go straight at the TPU forks of Doomslug and get enough bite to flip him over. Moray did some nice damage to his forks, and especially his metal bottom plate, but whatever brand of saw he uses should sponsor him because that thing took some good hits and it still looked alright. The only damage Moray took was some of its state-of-the-art top armor falling off. In between this fight and the grand final, Moray won the Most Creative Robot Award, which is extremely cool and not something that I expected. I got a Palm Beach Bots gift certificate, and I have a lot of great stuff, so I put that to good use. The event was already going extremely well for me, but this made it even better. Taipan got the award for Most Destroyed after Moray turned it inside out, and Doomslug got Most Unique or Best Engineering, or one of the ones like that. In the grand final, Moray would have to fight Enigma again after it annihilated everybody in the loser's bracket and made its way up to fight Moray again. Even though I beat him already, I definitely didn't feel confident, and I was thinking it was 50-50 for whether or not I would win. Just a few good hits from his bigger weapon might be enough to take out Moray, and he did switch to a disc, which was different from the blade he used in the first fight. My strategy would remain the same after it worked out for me last time though. Before the fight starts, I move a little bit too fast and almost run into Enigma, but Lars made sure I learned my lesson from this. When the fight starts, our forks prevent either robot from delivering its weapon. The weapons make contact with each other just barely, as the beginning of this fight was incredibly tense. Moray slips up first and turns where Enigma's weapon hits the side fork, cutting the tip off and flipping Moray over. My new wheels let me regroup fast enough to face him, and...
Yep. Yes! Hit battery! The battery's out.
Moray defeated Enigma by tap out, meaning I went home with my first place trophy. What happened here was that I outreached Enigma and lined up a perfect hit on his front armor, which sent enough shock through his robot to crack his top and bottom plate. Unlike the first fight, it wasn't just a traditional straight crack, it was this huge crack that went all across the PLA bottom plate and allowed his chassis to be bent up like that. Before I fully realized what happened, I went in for another hit, which ended up feeding the side fork into Enigma's spinner and ripping it off. Looking like that, Enigma really wouldn't have stood much of a chance here, so Lars taps out, and the battery was exposed, so the fight would have stopped anyway. I got this great picture of Moray staring across the box at Enigma with all of its internals exposed. The plant bracket ended in a somewhat similar way, with half of Ultraviolet being bent up. The only damage Moray took was the wheel guard being cut and torn off, and the mounting place had a slight chunk taken out of it. One of Moray's eel heads ended up stuck to the bottom of the robot somehow. I don't even know where it fell off. My printer just finished. Going into this event, I felt really good about this version of Moray, and I did think I had potential to leave with a trophy, but I absolutely did not expect to go home with first place. What was even crazier to me was that Moray went undefeated and made its way through the winner's bracket, plus it beat 3 really good robots. Luck was definitely involved, as Enigma was using unideal PLA top and bottom plates, and Doomslug came in with half drive, but at the end of the day, I won because I've improved the robot and found out what works best. Enigma won 4 fights in the loser's bracket and won all of them in dominant fashion, and the only reason I beat him is because I figured out a design for Moray that works well against a lot of competitive robots. The biggest takeaways were that the Roach wheels were great, and apparently being able to drive the robot is a good thing. I couldn't have done this well without the ability to get where I needed in very little time, which is only possible with quality traction. The other big thing that I learned is that reach is amazing. Moray beat Enigma both times because I could go straight at him, and win the exchange because Moray's spinner sticks out so far. With this kind of design, it's hard for my opponents to avoid getting hit by the weapon, and this performance made it clear that I should continue to focus on being a reach spinner. I love doing well and winning, but the thing I love most about combat robotics is the community. Earlier in the day, I beat up Taipan and Doomslug, but right after I won the final fight, I turned around, and Ben and Kevin were right there congratulating me, happy that I just won. Everyone I've met who goes to these events is extremely nice, and I always have fun competing, even if I don't do well, because I'm around a bunch of great people who I could talk about robots with, and pretty much everybody loves sharing design tips and whatever creative new things they came up with. I would not have had success like this if it wasn't for the other builders giving me ideas and advice. Moray's championship run really shows that if you stick with a design for long enough and refine it over time, you will eventually end up with a good robot. I started out with a robot that lost its first fight in like 3 hits, and I've gradually been making changes based on what I learned needs to be improved at each event. Don't just give up on a robot if it doesn't work the first time. Moray took over a year to get to this place. Obviously, I'm extremely happy with how this event went, and I was bringing Moray to Rabid the very next weekend, where I didn't make any changes and felt pretty confident in my chances. I have a lot of recaps to catch up on, and there are plenty of great fights you haven't seen yet, so you have that to look forward to, and thank you for watching.